Hi there, and welcome back to Man Behind Desk Does a News, where sometimes the news is really just me telling a specific person to shut the fudge up. Or in this case, try a little harder. So here's some more news. Bill Maher, try a whole lot harder, please. Or failing that, shut the fudge up a little bit, please. But let's back up, all right? Let's start at the beginning, which for us is, here's some old news. Remember more than several weeks ago when Bill Maher went on that new rule rant about fat shaming, and a bunch of people online got upset about it, and other people like Piers Morgan were like, yeah, right on, great company, Bill, and that was that. Well, I wanted to respond to Maher about his new rule, not because I was offended or feeling a bit too PC, but because he was wrong and lazy through the entire thing about everything he said. But then professional songmobile James Corden did a whole thing about it.
So I'm sat at home and I'm watching this, and all I could think, I was watching it, I was like, oh man, somebody needs to say something about this. If only there was someone with a platform who knew what it was actually like to be overweight. And then I realized, that'll be me.
While he does point out that Maher is just sort of generally wrong about the effects of fat shaming, the piece doesn't really go in depth into why, and it largely comes from a more personal and emotional place, which is totally valid, and it plays a huge part in why fat shaming doesn't work. But Bill was so wrong in so many ways, and I just wanted to explain why, but it had already been addressed. Maybe Bill would respond to that, who knows? Other stuff is going on. Who needs another video about Bill Maher? But then weeks passed, and it became more and more clear that this is kind of his entire approach to everything. And he just keeps saying things that are wrong without listening to the people, even though he's supposedly interested in the marketplace of ideas. And then, the day before we shot this, he was like,
autism issue, they certainly have studied it a million times, including out of this country.
Yes.
You know, I don't trust this country so much because of paychecks. I mean, for writing checks to people. But they've just, they say it's, and yet there's all these parents who say, I had a normal child, got the vaccine. This story keeps coming over. It seems to me more realistic to me, if we're just going to be realistic about it, like, it probably happens so rarely. But no one, you can't say it happens 1 in a million times, because then somebody will think, well, it's that I could be that millionth one.
This anecdotal vaccine concern is just, this video isn't about vaccines and how there's no evidence that they cause autism, which you said out loud, or how anecdotal evidence isn't strong evidence, which, you know, or this video isn't about vaccines. But Bill, since you're definitely watching this, and thanks for that, like and subscribe, I'll just leave this topic with our new segment, This Is Who You Sound Like.
Just the other day, 2 years old, 2.5 years old, a beautiful child, went to have the vaccine and came back, and a week later got a tremendous fever, got very, very sick, now is autistic.
But anyway, this isn't about vaccines. It's about everything else Bill Maher says, and it's kind of about Ellen and like cancel culture and healthcare and rich people disease. And I don't know, we'll get to that. We'll figure it out together. But first, the fat shaming stuff.
New rule at next Thursday's debate, one of the candidates has to say, the problem with our healthcare system is Americans eat shit and too much of it.
Now right off the bat, that's a weird claim. One of the problems with America's health is the food we eat. It's not a problem with the healthcare system. You can say it's a burden on the healthcare system if you have to, but using that and diverting the conversation away from the wacky notion that maybe in the richest country in the modern world where people literally eat gold, people should be able to go to a doctor and maybe even call an ambulance to literally save your life without having to pay $1,000. It's like saying, hey, why do we guarantee everyone a lawyer when they're criminals and stuff? Not that everybody gets a lawyer, but you get my point. Anyway, obesity isn't a problem with how currently one's ability to see a doctor is tied to their individual employment, as opposed to their individual existence in a good society that people would want to be in. You know how much insulin costs versus how much it needs to cost, Bill? You can go to the hospital and have a baby, and they will charge your baby, Bill. Anyway.
All the candidates will talk about their health plans, but no one will mention the key factor. The citizens don't lift a finger to help.
So from here on out, it seems like Bill has asserted that the problem with our healthcare system is the sick people and the ways in which they behave. Now, obviously, individual behavior affects your health, but that doesn't mean that because you don't exercise or do drink alcohol, you shouldn't be able to see a doctor. And
then the candidates will go back on the trail the next day and try to prove they're just as big a gluttonous slob as the rest of us. Sometimes while discussing pre-existing conditions. But why do people have so many pre-existing conditions? Being fat isn't a birth defect. Nobody comes out of the womb needing to buy 2 seats on the airplane.
there he is implying that the only pre-existing conditions are caused by obesity, and that ain't true. He then says being fat isn't a pre-existing condition or birth defect. Now, Bill, nobody's saying it's a birth defect or that all pre-existing conditions are birth defects. Also, there is a genetic component to obesity, and even if there wasn't, what's your proposal here, Bill? We're not doing universal health care until America gets a little more trim? You can't go to the doctor if your cancer is from smoking cigarettes? What's the BMI target for not going to the doctor, Bill? What's your policy there? Because some doctors actually don't take new patients over a certain weight, which probably doesn't help them lose weight or deal with a health problem that doesn't have to do with their weight. Or hey, maybe it does. I hope they can go to a doctor who can help them instead of being ineffectively shamed, Bill. This is just exclusionary elitist dog shit that doesn't even make any sense. Are we going to find all the bad things that lead to your pre-existing condition and decide which ones make you worthy or not? That's the whole thing about pre-existing conditions. You're not excluded. Heart disease and cancer are the leading causes of death in America, but the next is accidents. You want to police whose accidents are up to snuff? Also, heart disease and cancer are the leading causes of death in America if you're over 45. If you're under 45, it's accidents. The main cause of death is f***ing being old and diseased and dying, Bill. Everyone does it. It's okay if we all decide to help each other through that. Even if you're upset that some people eat too many f***ing ding-dongs. But anyway, speaking of ding-dongs, Bill then gets into the real topic here, food. And he introduces the one and only article he based this entire piece on that I'm pretty sure he definitely didn't read.
Here it is in a nutshell from the New York Times. Poor diet is the leading cause of mortality in the United States.
This article that Bill quote-unquote read, in a nutshell, is that Americans are eating terrible food and they're eating it too much. Also, we're wasting lots of food, and that seems bad and stupid for lots of reasons, and we're wasting a lot of food on feeding our food, and that's not the point. All right. This article, to quote Bill in a nutshell, is true. And obesity causes health issues, as we've discussed, diabetes, heart disease, cancer, and so on. It's not the only cause of those things, but it's a cause. And as we all know from Bill, whether or not the richest country on a planet full of countries that takes care of their citizens' health care, can pay for your health care, is based on the cause of the health problems. But anyway.
We scream at Congress to find a way to pay for our medical bills, but it wouldn't be nearly the issue it is if people just didn't eat like assholes.
Now again, aside from the fact that Bill seems to keep weirdly implying that our healthcare system is not the, or a, problem that should be fixed, he's also saying, don't demand anything of your government because we're all eating like crap. And this is super interesting to me because aside from the fact that like the government does lots of stuff despite the behavior of individuals, because it seems like Bill doesn't know that we have a Department of Agriculture and a Food and Drug Administration, government entities that have some control over the food we eat and how it's produced. We live in a society, Bill. Often eating junk food is cheaper than eating healthy. Many poor areas have food deserts, which makes it more difficult to eat better. Taking the time to exercise. It's not like everybody is rich, Bill. It's not like everybody's done interviews talking about how hard it is to eat right and exercise, and now you finally make healthy food and have a personal trainer that you see regularly. I wonder why the millionaire finally has an easy time staying healthy, and an even easier time on people who don't.
What's Elizabeth Warren's plan for that?
Maybe relevant, maybe not, but Bill got real rich and hates taxes now, and is currently complaining about free college and free healthcare all the time, and I don't wonder why. Anyway, I guess my point here, more of which we'll get to, is that ludicrous amounts of money seems to have some bad side effects in regards to how the government works, not you, Bill. And there are powerful industries and lobbies that influence the government. Like, Bill is saying the healthcare system isn't the problem. It's actually the food people eat. And people just take responsibility and stop eating so poorly. But much like climate change, the real causes, the real change, doesn't come from individuals. It comes from much larger and complex systems, and like corporations and stuff. Bill mentions diabetes without mentioning the unnecessarily and grotesquely high price of insulin many people have to ration. Another element of the rise in diabetes is the sugar lobby's effort to demonize fat and say sugar is good. We'll actually get more to that in a minute. Bill.
The Amazon fires are because farmers there are burning down the rainforest to make room for future hamburgers and soybeans.
This is true. The Amazon rainforest is on fire on purpose to make room for cattle and stuff. Now, this aspect of it actually has nothing to do with America specifically, since most of America's beef is from Australia, New Zealand, Canada, and Mexico. Also, there's a lot one could go into in regards to the meat industry. And also, yeah, Bill, this thing you mentioned that isn't about fat shaming people is also bad. Anyway.
We weren't always like this. Watching the footage of the 50th anniversary of Apollo 11, I was struck by how not fat everyone in the crowd was. We looked like a completely different race of people.
Now, this is especially interesting because if you look into the rise of obesity, like if you just Google it, just type the words and spend a few minutes on the topic, you'd learn so much very quickly. Simple things like that in the 60s, nearly half the jobs in the private sector required at least moderate physical activity. In 2010, less than 20% demanded the same amount of work. Our jobs, the things people need in order to get health care, are contributing to the problem. We drive everywhere and walk less than other countries. Obviously, that's not the only factor, and it doesn't excuse people from not being active, but it's relevant and adds a lot of nuance and context to Bill's excuse to shit on fat people. This could have helped to inform his bad point, is my point. And it was easily obtained and directly relates to Bill's complaint about one photo of people in the 60s specifically. Also in the 60s specifically, the sugar lobby worked to demonize fat and secretly fund scientific research to frame sugar as really, really good, in reaction to an overflow of legitimate research coming from elsewhere. In the specific decade that Bill was wondering about.
Some years ago, when they were trying to find the genesis of heart disease, there were two considerations, sugar and fat.
Right.
And they paid off Harvard Medical School professors 50 grand to lay the blame at the feet of fat.
This whole thing, and Bill's way of thinking, which I promise we'll get more to, it's so lazy. In fact, this is so lazy and needlessly contrarian with little thought but LOL f you fatties. He complains about fat acceptance in this video. And if Bill Maher had taken this amount of time to Google the words fat acceptance movement, he'd quickly find out that the fat acceptance movement started in the 60s. Bill, that could have been a point to bring up for your argument. Not a great one, because of all the other stuff I've been saying, but one. Anyway, the sugar lobby is also responsible for keeping the percentage of daily sugar requirements off of nutrition labels. You'll notice, on all of your labels, it only shows the grams, the grammage, not how much you should have per day. It's the only one. Anyway, several years ago, it was decided to add the percentage of daily sugar to labels, because all of our shit has too much sugar in it. And this, after being decided several years ago, is hopefully happening in 2020. And also, it's only showing the percentage of artificial sugar, so. Regardless, pointless tangent, sorry. The sugar lobby's push to put sugar in everything we eat has nothing to do with Bill Maher's thoughtful rant about how people with diabetes can go eat shit. End of his bad points. There's more? This will never end? Okay.
Can fat be beautiful? That's in the eye of the beholder. But healthy? No. That's science.
And we'll get back to that. But now, here.
We shouldn't taunt people about it. And overeating shouldn't be singled out as the only vice. It's not. We all have something. But there's no smoking acceptance or drunk acceptance.
Now, I understand the point he's trying to make. But we've also already discussed how nobody reasonable would argue against single-payer health care because people die from smoking. You probably wouldn't argue that you can't get that cancer treatment you need because you smoked. You dead f***. But also, overeating is an addiction, and when you compare it to smoking or alcohol, which are also addictive, you're forgetting that human beings, and in fact organisms in general, do not require smoking tobacco to live. This analogy would only work if people needed to drink alcohol to survive, and then you tell an alcoholic, okay, drinking too much is bad for you, but you still need to drink a little bit of alcohol every day or you'll die. The analogy just rings really hollow. And speaking of terrible analogies...
Hey, liberals, you know how you hate it when conservatives won't even let the CDC study gun violence as a public health issue? This is that. You're the NRA of mayonnaise.
And then, of course, we get back to the real point.
Fat shaming doesn't need to end. It needs to make a comeback.
But here's the problem, Bill. It's not anything like the CDC not being allowed to study gun violence, because people do study obesity and health. Studies show that fat shaming does not work. It actually hurts and makes it more difficult for people to lose weight, which is already hard for people to do and to keep off. Doctors are much more hostile to fat patients, less helpful, and some even actively don't accept patients over 200 pounds. All things I've already mentioned. So when you say,
that's science,
maybe you could put in a tiny bit of effort beyond that article you didn't read, because that one article you put on the screen in order to make your wrong point was written by both a former Secretary of Agriculture and an expert on nutrition science, and it weirdly didn't mention fat shaming. Probably because of the studies they'd read on the topic of fat shaming. The article, most of this article, gives many solutions and policies that can help solve this problem. Paragraphs of solutions. Here they are on the screen. And here's an arrow pointing at the fat shaming part. Aside from that part about fat shaming with an arrow pointing to it, there's just like a bunch of government and industry policies to help the population. So in regards to this CDC comparison, what you're doing, Bill, who thanks for subscribing, is more like if the CDC was allowed to study gun violence. And they came to conclusions and they suggested a bunch of solutions that don't include kicking people while shouting, "Stop shooting people, asshole," at them. And then you go on your show and say, look at this article about our gun violence problem. We need to bring back kicking people and shouting, "Stop shooting people, asshole," at them. Anyway, anything else, Bill?
People know I'm speaking the truth.
Right on. So here's what I really wanted to talk about. Everybody thinks their opinions are correct. That's what opinions are. But Bill also often talks about how, people laugh at offensive jokes because they know it's true.
And also because when people laugh, they know it's true.
That's what laughter is. If you laugh, it means it's true. If you don't laugh, it means
I'm speaking the truth.
Bill thinks he's a truth-telling sage, no matter what, telling you the hard truths, the politically incorrect, nasty shit that you don't want to know. And he's often very wrong. And sometimes that's kind of dangerous. Like with the vaccine anecdote about the person he may have known, which I guess we are going to talk about, because apparently Bill Maher's always talked about this. To quote this 2015 article's headline from ScienceBasedMedicine.org, he's still an anti-vaccine crank after all these years. So much so that he notably tries not to bring it up while talking to a scientist. But his audience and guests already know that he's been an anti-vaccine crank for years, so...
So don't be all too high and mighty there. Because there's certain aspects of science denial that are squarely in the liberal left.
Like?
Oh, really? You want to have that conversation?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
I know one, but I don't want to get into it.
Okay, fine.
Here's him a decade ago, talking to former Senate Majority Leader and physician Bill Frist about swine flu vaccines.
2 weeks ago, a 30-year-old came into my hospital, perfectly healthy, dead of the swine flu. If he'd had the vaccine, if the vaccine were available, he'd be alive.
That's an anecdotal story.
Okay,
That's
no.
not typical. This is not a very serious flu.
Yeah, that anecdotal evidence of yours is bunk, I tell you. Good point, Bill. Anyway, do we also have a clip of Maher mentioning something about the terrible food we all put into our bodies to justify his vaccine skepticism and not say why Americans are so unhealthy?
We didn't used to have all this corn syrup in our bodies, antibiotics. It could be any combination. So I'm a little cautious.
Cool. Anyway, I'm not just going to talk about all the ways in which Bill Maher is wrong about vaccines, or how, to prove his point, he quoted Jonas Salk about live vaccines, and Bill Frist was like, when's that quote from? The 50s? Live vaccines are for things like chickenpox, measles, mumps, those diseases people get more of in communities where kids aren't vaccinated. And it's just kind of irresponsible to have on this anti-vaxxer and spout anecdotal evidence to support it. But again, I'm not here to just be like, Bill is wrong about X or Y, or like do a rundown of all the stuff he's wrong about that I think is bad. I could. He once, in a serious manner, said that people who raise mentally disabled children are exactly like him having a dog, which is easy. He's pretty Islamophobic, and not just because he's anti-religion, like he really doesn't like Muslims specifically, and not in a, there's extremism these days kind of way, but in like a, that specific religion is specifically bad and there's something fundamentally wrong with it, despite, much like the vaccine thing, not listening to people who talk to him about it.
It's not us that changed, it's Islam that changed. And that in my lifetime, this culture has really changed. If you look back to when I was 10 or 11, like half a century ago, these cities, Beirut, Damascus, Tehran, Baghdad, these were famous open cities. Beirut was called the Paris of the East.
Despite absorbing information about the region from just decades ago, or hopefully being aware of things like the Golden Age of Islam, he'll just boil it all down to what he really thinks.
They bring that desert stuff.
Oh, okay. But again, I'm not here to just list off his wrong, gross shit. But again, okay, one more. And to really get into it, we need to talk about
Milo Yiannopoulos. Milo.
Milo is a complete fraud who believes in nothing. His goal was to piss people off by saying outlandish things that are also true, but also, I'm just joking. You take everything so seriously, but also feminism is cancer, and so on. If you were duped by Milo after listening to him talk for 5 seconds, you need to have a long think. Much like if you associate with Prager University, you shouldn't be taken seriously. If you associated with Milo or lifted him up in any way, same. But Bill loved Milo. Sure, they disagreed on some things, but he sure does trigger the SJWs. He sure is politically incorrect. He sure is a champion of free speech. And I'm not gonna really show clips of this interview because Milo is really boring and also a blatant liar. He lied throughout it, coyly. And as Maher notes in the interview, he was employed by Steve Bannon and was actually paid by Bannon and billionaires to sneak white nationalism into the zeitgeist. That was his goal. So let's get that man on TV. But anyway, about a day after Milo was on Maher's show, Milo's career took a bit of a turn. It was the beginning of the end for him because of video surfacing in which Milo discusses his belief that men, specifically clergymen, molesting young boys is sort of a good and necessary relationship for the gay experience, a coming-of-age sort of thing. And again, no need to show the clip, but after this happened, Bill Maher discussed Milo's downfall, taking credit for it, claiming, then we had Milo on, despite the fact that many people said, oh, how dare you give a platform to this man. What I think people saw was an emotionally needy Ann Coulter wannabe trying to make a buck off of the left's propensity for outrage. And by the end of the weekend, by dinner time Monday, he's dropped as a speaker at CPAC. Then he's dropped by Breitbart, and his book deal falls through. As I say, sunlight is the best disinfectant. You're welcome. Do we have a clip or two of disinfectant?
Stop taking the bait, liberals. The fact that they all freaked out
Wasn't it
about this
pathetic?
little impish British you have the potential to morph. I mean, you remind me like of a young, gay, alive Christopher Hitchens.
Ann Coulter wannabe, young gay Christopher Hitchens, you know, whatever. Just basking in the sunlight. You did it, Bill. You took him down. Hell yeah. Wait, also, don't you hate cancel culture, but you're praising yourself for getting Milo canceled? All right, we'll get into that actually later. Interesting that the thing that took Milo down, which Bill Maher is praising himself for, was about adults having sex with young boys. Something Bill Maher thinks is fine, too.
Mary Kay Letourneau, the teacher from Seattle, who is in jail because she is in love. That's how I view it. I admit that it's unorthodox. She is 35, the boy is 14.
That's him on Politically Incorrect in 1998, saying adult male teacher sex with child bad, adult female teacher sex with child good, because he wanted to f*** his teachers and stuff. It's a lazy scumbag opinion that he shares with Milo, as well as himself years later, as he discusses in this Playboy interview. It's especially interesting because, much like all of his awful opinions based on nothing, he was explained why that's actually f***ed up, Bill, very eloquently and succinctly in 1998 by Henry Rollins.
How can a woman rape a man?
I think that an older woman can manipulate a young kid, and I don't think it's really healthy. I don't think it's healthy for a kid who's going to be 14 with 2 kids out in the world. I think the that those children will grow up fairly damaged. I think that kid's going to grow up fairly damaged.
So you're on her side?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, correct. But Bill just shrugs, well, I'll still have this opinion in 10 years or whatever. He's a marketplace of ideas man, but he doesn't actually care about it. He's not open to it. He's like a dumber, more alive Christopher Hitchens, who was so stubborn that he didn't think waterboarding was torture until he was waterboarded for 17 seconds. But Bill just really likes being in the politically incorrect club, regardless of how actually incorrect he is. It's why he'll have on Steve Bannon and gush over him, because...
And I know that, you had a little event there at the New Yorker. They had a festival. In fact, I want to read Malcolm Gladwell's quote, because they were going to interview you, and then you were disinvited. I've been disinvited many times, by the way. It's a good club.
Yes, what a cool club to be in. The right-wing nationalist propagandist club. And Bill knows who Bannon is. He hates Donald Trump and thinks he's a fascist. He thinks fascism is on the rise. He's worried Donald Trump won't even leave office. Yet...
I'm going to say to you what I always say to conservatives when they come here. First of all, thank you. I appreciate it, and it says volumes why the Republicans are in power and we have none.
So I guess what I mean to say is, this concludes our only installment of our new segment. It's weird to praise a person you know is a fascist propagandist for taking the opportunity to speak to a wide audience on a prestigious media network. Bill doesn't even take Bannon's advice about the thing he knows about, the information he desperately wanted to know about what Democrat could beat Donald Trump.
I want the answer to this. Who scares you?
If Bernie Sanders had an ounce of Avenatti's fearlessness, he would have been the Democratic nominee, and we would have had a much tougher time. And if Bernie had had the type of fight and fearlessness that Trump had, he would have won the Democratic primary, and then we would have had left-wing populism and right-wing populism fight it out in 2016.
But as we've discussed, Bill no like eat the taxes. But what's my point? What am I even talking about? He's just a guy with terrible opinions and bad guests on an enormous platform. But all the things we've been talking about, they're indicative of some pitfalls we see a lot from rich liberals in the Trump era. The left got a little too PC, so I changed all of my opinions about the economy, social issues, systemic racism, healthcare, and history. I'm not saying Bill embodies all of that, but he falls for it very easily. His need to be anti-PC leads him to embracing and validating weirdos and liars and reactionaries like Milo, or the uncivil civility wanter and my good friend Ben Shapiro, or people with reactionary views who work for right-wing think tanks that were literally started to combat the liberal consensus of the 60s that arose from researching things and coming to conclusions. These people start with a conclusion or bad opinion and go look for any bit of evidence to support it. It happens all the time on Prager University, according to their own website, not an accredited university. And professional censorship victims who aren't being censored and who are funded by homophobic fossil fuel billionaires for the purposes of lying. They lie constantly, all the time. I won't even bother going through any of them. There are so many videos pointing out their countless lies. Links in the description. My God, they are such liars all the time. And it's all run by Dennis Prager. Seen here on Bill Maher's show like a couple of days ago. There he is, lying. Not even going to give the audio. Just look at that liar. You can't even look at him in the eyes. Just a liar, talking about how America is the least racist country in the world. My point is, Dennis Prager and a lot of the lying reactionary frauds Bill has on his show, giving credibility to them because they're anti-PC and safe space too. Well, all these people are the types of people who would be like, I think fat shaming is good, and raising taxes for universal health care is bad. So here's this article I found where the headline says the food we eat is bad. Point proven. Thanks for watching PragerU. And a lot of it is just meant to protect capital and the status quo. He wants to go back to the way things were before Trump because he doesn't understand why Trump is the president. Sure, there's the racism and misogyny and a lot of factors. But Trump, despite literally living in a tower of gold, was presented as a populist, an outsider, anti-establishment, because people are fed up with austerity and massive wealth inequality. Productivity is up, but wages are stagnant. There's food insecurity, the healthcare thing, and just generally all the things that are wrong while people are literally eating gold. But Bill thinks it's it's PC culture. He's been complaining about political correctness for his entire career on TV for millions of dollars. But he says we got Trump because of PC culture and comic books, and not stuff like asshole millionaires ripping into red states about how that big sea of red feels like their invitation got lost in the mail, and they still use the mail. Weird dunk on people who have to use the useful service, the post office, Bill. Bill adds,
We have Chef Wolfgang Puck. They have Chef Boyardee.
You got 'em, Bill. F those people. And they're bad food for them that they have to eat. You know about the food thing. Hey, Bill, you know what else bum places you despise full of people you despise have? Let's take, what's a place? Lima, Ohio. Bunch of slack-jawed cereal box readers if they read at all, right? They also don't get an ambulance bill because they pay for it with their taxes. Huh. Anyway, again, what's the point of this? Cancel Bill Maher? I don't know, sure? Bill loves to complain about cancel culture. It's a great club to be in, right, buddy? But we have a whole other episode about cancel culture in general and how it doesn't really exist. But what it's really talking about is how cancel culture doesn't exist for the powerful people who complain about it all the time. When they complain about it, it's often them saying something while saying they are not allowed to say it, while making lots of money saying it. They're often complaining about criticism or mean tweets. Like when Ellen was criticized for palling around with an anti-gay marriage war criminal who expanded our surveillance state and didn't close Guantanamo Bay. No, not that one. That one. Well, Ellen went on her massive platform to liken war criminal George W. Bush, who paid no consequences for anything, to friends of hers who wear fur. See, it's a disagreement among friends, because what she's doing here is the bad kind of class solidarity. She would never have Trump on her show, despite buying him a literal golden baby stroller earlier. But George W. Bush, he's just someone she disagrees with. In her defense, she says this.
But a lot of people were mad, and they did what people do when they're mad. They tweet.
Now, aside from the fact that she also shares a nice tweet to prove that Twitter is good, lack of consequences for the powerful makes people feel powerless. And social media, with its many flaws, lets them communicate that, sometimes directly to powerful, out-of-touch millionaires like her, or Bill Maher. And then when people make a satire video of her speech juxtaposed with the torture stuff, well, the millionaire gets it taken down, cancels it. And this kind of shit is it's just frustrating. Recently, Hillary Clinton and her daughter were on The Daily Show, and Trevor Noah took this opportunity to ask about her relationship with Jeff Epstein. Bold. Wow. Speaking truth to power. Except,
Hillary, I have to ask you a question that has been plaguing me for a while. How did you kill Jeffrey Epstein? Because you're not in power, but you have all the power.
The infuriating thing that you just watched is a fun little bit that the rich and powerful people are having fun with. But it actually functions as obfuscating the very real connections Epstein had with her husband and countless wealthy, powerful people who wanted nothing more than for him to go away. They were on the show to promote their book about gutsy women, so maybe like a better question would be about the many young girls who were trafficked and abused by Jeff Epstein, a man who famously had a plane called the Lolita Express and which Bill Clinton rode so many times. Jeff Epstein, whose assistant, partner, sex trafficking helper attended Chelsea Clinton's wedding after it was already publicly known that Epstein was a pedophile, and so on. So what would you say to those girls as gutsy women who had those powerful relationships and the knowledge of who he was and what he was doing? But instead, it's this fun little joke that they can laugh at and erase all of that. I'm off the rails again. Bill Maher, cancel culture, or in this case, criticism and mean tweets. When we hear about cancel culture from people like Maher, who was weirdly proud about canceling Milo, they don't say anything about how we live in a punitive society, and as a whole, we sort of embrace that, and social media makes it even worse, and there's a restorative approach available to situations, and there's a nuanced conversation. And some normal people have literally lost their jobs in a society where healthcare is tied to employment, and harassment and doxing can lead to suicide, and all that stuff. But no, to Bill and the people who complain about it on stage or in the New York Times are talking about something else and using it as a weapon and a shield from criticism. To them, cancel culture has nothing to do with people actually affected by it. It's actually about,
you're a great sport, you have a great sense of humor, unlike these social justice warriors who are going to be out there tweeting that all the jokes are problematic. You people can blow me, you pussy sticks.
People booed me at my comedy. Bill Maher doesn't really speak truth to power because he likes where he's sitting. It's comfortable. He's got that personal trainer now. He's speaking truth to Maher. He can point out years ago, when Obamacare was being passed, that it's a Republican bill and that a real left healthcare bill would actually be single payer.
The whole thing is a Republican idea.
Bill?
It's the old Bob Dole plan from the 90s. A Democrat idea would be at least a public option. But really, a liberal idea would be a single-payer plan.
But nowadays, when single payer is actually a viable option and on the table,
I'm looking hard at Amy Klobuchar.
man of the people. Interesting thing about that interview with fascist propagandist Dinesh D'Souza, it wasn't his first. When he was on Politically Incorrect, Dinesh and Maher were discussing how the 9/11 terrorists weren't cowards because they killed themselves, a hard thing to do. Maher took it further and said the real cowards are us, who send missiles from thousands of miles away. And what happened after that is that Bill Maher got canceled. Ari Fleischer, the spokesperson for the president of the country at the time, went in front of the nation and in regards to Bill's comments said it's a reminder to all Americans that they need to watch what they say, watch what they do. This is not a time for remarks like that. There never is. And then he was canceled. Not by the PC police, not by sensitive college kids, by the government. Complains about PC culture for decades, canceled by the government for insulting the military, not for the pro-teachers f***ing their underage students stuff. But anyway, again, what's the point here? Bill Maher, please try harder. Listen to people who aren't liars in regards to your wrong opinions. Stop having propagandists on your show just to bond over the SJW stuff. Cancel Bill Maher. Don't cancel Bill Maher. Or is the real point here, Bill Maher, who is still watching this, like and subscribe. Comment. Hey everybody, thanks for watching the last few seconds of the video. Like and subscribe, and check out our patreon.com/SomeMoreNews if you'd like to support us, and our podcast, Even More News. And cut!